Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fatin Iffah Binti Shaharudin, and today I would like to present to you my infographic poster with the title is Psychopathy and Suicidal Ideation Mediate the Relationship between Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, PTSD, and Incarcerated Status in Military Personnel. First of all, I would like to touch on the abstract. While previous research has shown a link between post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) and criminal behavior, the current study investigates into the mechanisms that underpin this association. A correlational study was conducted using archival data from the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks (USBD) and a control population of U.S. Army soldiers. 310 incarcerated male U.S. Army soldiers. Data were provided by the USBD. In addition, data were also collected from 310 non-incarcerated male U.S. Army soldiers in the greater Fort Rucker, Alabama. The findings revealed partial mediation PTSD symptoms having a direct effect on imprisonment status and significant indirect impacts through suicide, ideation, and psychopathy while controlling for IQ and kindness. In furnishing evidence of how psychopathy and suicidal ideation mediate the relationship between PTSD and incarceration status in military personnel, this research highlights specific internalization and externalizations mechanisms that may increase the tendencies of people with greater PTSD symptoms to engage in criminal behavior. Next, we continue with the summary. Previous research has shown that combat exposure and other forms of military-related trauma, such as sexual assaults, threats, and physical alteration, and military training accidents, can cause PTSD and its symptoms such as anxiety, attention biases, somatic disruptions, social integration difficulties, and personality change. In military populations, researchers have discovered a correlation between PTSD symptoms, related psychological problems, and criminal behavior. This study investigates whether PTSD and criminal behaviors are associated with particular externalization and internalization mechanisms. Externalization variables are concerned with how people express discomfort through outwardly oriented cognitions, emotions, and behaviors such as substance abuse, risk-taking, aggression, sensation seeking, or antisocial behavior. Internalization, on the other hand, refers to how people express their distress through inwardly focused cognitions, emotions, and behaviors like depression, anxiety, or social avoidance. According to prior studies, PTSD symptoms have been linked to both externally and internally directed thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. PTSD is related to both externalization of their symptoms through psychopathic tendencies and the internalization of their symptoms through suicidal ideation, resulting in an increasing tendencies to engage in criminal behaviors. Suicidal ideation caused by PTSD can lead to criminal activity, and general strain theory indicates that people who experience negative effect after traumatic events may engage in risk-taking and criminal behaviors to relieve the stress associated with their trauma and overcome perceptions that they are futureless. The results showed that in military personnel, both psychopathy and suicidal ideation mediate the association between PTSD and incarceration status, which means that both internalization and externalization may increase the tendency of people who have significant PTSD symptoms to engage in criminal behavior. Moreover, additional research is needed to see whether treating military veterans with PTSD, with a focus on psychopathy and suicidal thoughts, lessens the likelihood of future criminal activity. Before considering Before considering how these findings may influence practice and future study, keep in mind that psychopathy is not a diagnostic. Psychopathic people tend to be manipulative and frequently mislead clinicians, thus posing significant challenges in identifying relevant symptoms and behaviors as well as developing suitable treatment techniques. Therefore, further experimental and clinical data should be included in future studies to further validate the findings provided here. Next, we continue with the introduction and objective. Since the beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001 and Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, crimes against military personnel have gained a significant increase of national attention. Other studies indicated that veterans of service members who are returning home after overseas deployments are more likely to engage in aggressive, violent, or criminal behavior. For instance, Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom veterans are almost 3 times more likely than veterans of other wars to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. The study's main objective was to see whether psychopathy and suicidal ideation played a role in the link between PTSD symptoms in the military and criminal behavior, defined as incarceration status. So, we continue with the material and method. The study was reviewed and approved by the U.S. Army Research Development and Engineering Command Institutional Review Board prior to implementation. All participants in the non-retrieval data received gave their informed consent. The USDB provided data in March 2015 from 310 of the 461 incarcerated male US Army soldiers who were in the prison at the time the study was conducted. Data were also collected from 310 non-incarcerated male US Army soldiers stationed at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and women were excluded because the USDB is an all-male prison. There are several measures used, which are Personal Assessment Inventory, PI. It is a 344-item self-report measure of various domains of personality and psychopathology in adults and was assigned for use in professional and research settings. Suicidal ideation, PSI, reflects one's propensity for suicide. Psychopathy checklist revised, PCLR, assess psychopathic personality disorders in forensic populations. It provides a complete coverage of the domain of psychopathic traits and behaviors. Shipley Institute of Living Scale provides an assessment of general intellectual functioning in adults and adolescents. PTSD checklist military. It is a validated measure of PTSD corresponding to the DSM-5 used by Department of Veteran Affairs to screen, diagnose, monitor symptom change during and after treatment. As you can see up there is a table that shows descriptive statistics for study measures by group. So next we talk about the results. For descriptive statistics, the overall mean PCLM score, which represents the presence of symptoms and its intensity, was 25.34, significantly below the established clinical threshold of 50 for PTSD symptoms. On the PCLR, the overall mean score was 32.61, indicating a low level of psychopathy or non-psychopathy. These PCLR scores have been converted from raw scores to T-scores because this is what was provided for the USDB sample. Approximately 23% of the USDB samples scored within the moderate to high score thresholds, whereas none of the control samples scored above the low level. The overall mean on the suicidal ideation subscale was 48.62, which falls in the average score range, indicating that there is little or no suicide potential. USDB participants were more likely to score above average than the control participants. Alternatively, 2.23% of the control samples scored above average, suggesting periodic self-harm thoughts, with one participant reporting a score indicating significant suicide risk. Next, we continue to the logistic regression and mediational analysis. Through the mediating variables of suicidal ideation and psychopathy, the model postulates an influence of military PTSD symptom on incarceration status. The predictor variable and the suggested mediator variables are represented by path A1 and A2. The process model's result suggested partial mediation with PTSD symptom, having a direct effect on incarceration status, as well as significant indirect effects through suicidal ideation and psychopathy, while intelligence and warmth were controlled. Lastly, in conclusion, both psychopathy and suicidal ideation mediate the relationship between PTSD and incarceration status in military personnel, which means that both internalization and externalization may increase the tendency of people who have significant PTSD symptoms to engage in criminal behavior. This really shows that most armed forces members were likely to experience trauma and PTSD symptoms as they go back from their services. That's all from me. Thank you.